Welcome back to BYU Sports Nation. Jarom, Jordan, Dave McCann with you. The voice of the Cougars, Greg Wrubell, is in the house. Greg, you've been busy. You've been all over the country. How you feeling, man? San Diego to Rhode Island?
November, December is always a fun time for a sportscaster. Yeah.
So do you want to go to Orlando or do you want to go to San Antonio?
I've never been to San Antonio before, so I like that for that reason. Orlando's never bad. So, yeah, either one's great.
And if you go a second time to Orlando, maybe you'll see a Rocket again. Who knows?
That was pretty cool.
That was cool. Yeah. BYU scores a touchdown, suddenly a rocket goes off.
Rocket.
That was crazy.
That was nice.
Okay, let's talk about kind of where BYU's at in the college football playoff rankings in this situation. I know you, like most of us, feel passionately about, like, why isn't BYU several spots higher?
It's not even just BYU. It's the Big 12. I mean, I forget, BYU had its chance. BYU should be somewhere different, and they're not because they lost a game to Kansas. You can't afford to lose. So relative to BYU, they could have put themselves as a seed. They could have put themselves in the bracket. They didn't. It's not about BYU so much as the Big 12. Since when did a power conference suddenly lose its power conference cachet? I don't understand that. I just don't understand how a team that played a Mountain West slate is seen that many spots higher than a team that played a power conference slate. If anybody should know the difference between playing a Mountain West or an independent slate versus, as opposed to playing a power conference slate, it's BYU. BYU's got a pretty good perspective on the difference. There's a difference. If you stick Boise State in the Big 12, do they have the same record they do today?
No.
Unlikely. Very unlikely. It matters who you play week in, week out. And so I just don't understand why the committee just suddenly said, well, this power conference team or this power conference doesn't carry the same weight as the other power conferences. I understand SEC, Big 12 are kind of on their own plane, but you can't just suddenly say it equates to a Mountain West.
Wasn't it kind of a slow death, though, because you have Boise State here, you have BYU here, and they start losing, and Boise State just keeps winning, and the natural thing in a poll is you just keep improving as you keep winning, and Arizona State, they weren't even in it yet, and so they've had to make up all this ground. All of a sudden, they're at 10, and Arizona State's come steamrolling in, but they're at 15 because they were nowhere a few weeks ago. And I'm not defending the committee, but just by the nature of how these polls work, I can see why Boise State's at 10 and the last man standing in the Big 12 is 15 because 3 weeks ago they weren't even in the top 25.
But at some point, somebody in the room has to point to data and metrics and resumes and say, let's really look at what we're doing here. And that never happened. And you simply can't judge Boise State's one loss as the best thing about their resume.
Right.
But that's what's happened. They continue to say they lost to the number one team. Yeah, they did in the first couple weeks of the season when no one knows who anyone is yet, a same Oregon team that struggled to beat Idaho the week before. So you can't have the best talking point for a team be a loss. It shouldn't work that way.
No.
And it has in this instance. There are some who say that once the Big 12 championship game is played, there will be some correction, but could there be 5 spots of correction or 6 spots of correction?
Too much, right?
If Boise takes care of its business against UNLV, it's unlikely. So, yeah, you're going to see a Mountain West Conference champion likely take a spot that should be allotted for a power conference champion because there's a difference between a power conference and a non-power conference slate that the committee has refused to acknowledge.
Isn't it interesting, too, with SMU's plight? And I read an article this morning where if they said, hey, we're not going to play in this ACC championship game, they'll go to the playoff. If they play in the ACC game and they lose to Clemson, they might be out of the playoff.
I've heard that too. I wonder if there's some bylaw that prevents that.
I don't know.
And that'd be weird.
It would certainly be unprecedented, but we're in unprecedented times.
Same committee
but
that
the system is set up.
Right, but the committee
that.
also said well before the rankings came out, we don't want to penalize teams or punish teams for losing conference championship games. They turn around immediately and say, yeah, well, we could drop SMU if they lose. Yeah, absolutely.
we got some teams we're going to put in.
The conflicting signals from this group has been nonstop, and yet the biggest, I think, thing to remedy is how you equate a G6, G5 slate with a power conference slate. They're not the same, and they're treating them the same.
It'll be interesting to see if they do expand because I feel like it's inevitable to 14 or 16. I think the same issues will come up. It'll just be further down the line. I don't know that anything is sort of corrected. We just in this situation would now be like, well, BYU should be in the top 16 or 15 so that they're in at this point. But we'll see what happens. There's too much money not to, probably, so we'll see. But we know this. I don't agree with the conference champ top 4 thing. I think they should just be the top 4 teams should be the top 4 seeds. Like it's kind of fun. You win your league, you get rewarded, but I don't know. I think the top 4 teams should be the top 4 seeds.
And that really has spawned the biggest debate because that 4 seed, that last bye, goes to one of 2 conference champions. And in this case, you're talking about the Mountain West Conference champ versus the Big 12 Conference champ. And if they went the other way, yeah, it would look there wouldn't be the same debate.
Argument, yeah. Okay, let's talk about bowl game preference. You mentioned location. We learned this morning the Alamo has trimmed it down already to BYU Arizona State versus BYU Iowa State or Colorado Arizona State. Do you have a preference of Alamo and that matchup potentially with Colorado, it seems, or Pop-Tarts versus ACC?
Not really. At this point, if you're not in the playoff, they're just games. Once you get there, it's the cliche question, which team wants to be there more? For any team, it's going to be a consolation. Colorado knows they were that close to being the Big 12 title game. BYU knows it was that close to being the Big 12 title game with the playoff. These are consolations. Anything outside the playoff is as it always has been. It's a consolation. It's fine. It's great. It's another chance for a win, but it's just a game. It'll be a game against a team you probably haven't seen, which is good. Even though they're the same league, it didn't play Colorado, didn't play Iowa State. And of course, the ACC would be a totally new team. So it's good. It's fine.
And also consolation teams. If it's Clemson and Miami, it's also consolation.
Everyone views it the same way. Everyone has to view it the same way. And then when you factor in the opt-outs and everything else, it always comes down to motivation in bowl games. And it always has been that way. Outside the big games, who's more motivated to go play and win a game?
Does BYU see this a little bit different, though, since even Colorado, I mean, they both so overachieved from expectation.
From external expectations. If you talk to BYU, they thought this season was possible. Going back to the summer, they'll say, oh, we knew we could have this kind of year, double-digit win season. So there they are. So 10 wins is great when you're 0-0 and the media says you're going to be 13th. When you're 9-0, 10-2 isn't as good because you could have been and should have been somewhere different. It's great. It's a great win. It's a great season. 10 wins is outstanding. 11 wins would be great. But they thought they were capable of this kind of year. But 9-0 is one thing. When you get to 10-2, it feels a little different than at the start of the year when everything was in front of you. So yeah, excellent with an asterisk. Asterisk being you were that close, and it was really that Kansas game. That was the game. You could lose Arizona State at Arizona State. Win your home games, you're in. It didn't happen.
And we'd be talking about a game in 2 days from now instead.
They had the inside track, the strong inside track.
Oh, yeah.
Strong inside track. And it came down to, we all know what happened in that Kansas game. Things you might never see if you run 10 seasons of football, we saw in that game. Yeah.
Just craziness. Okay, men's hoops, obviously a disappointing loss at Providence. What did you notice in that game that maybe was an outlier versus something that BYU needs to correct?
Yeah, it was a perfect storm game. I mean, you could almost tell in the first 5 minutes things were not right. BYU missed its first 4 layups. They finished 8 for 18 on layups. The bench shot 50%. The starters shot 22%. At one point, the starting backcourt was a combined 0 for 15. Like, when do you see these things? They're the first team in 14 years to lose a regulation game with 21 offensive rebounds.
In BYU or NCAA?
No. The entire NCAA. It's been 14 years since a team lost a regulation game with 21 offensive rebounds.
Wow.
The last team to do it was Providence, actually, back in 2010. But yeah, funny. You have 21 offensive rebounds. You shoot 27 more times than the opposition. You turn over only 5 times. Well, you probably won that game. If you didn't win it, you're not losing by 20. They lost by 20. It was a strange, weird, perfect storm game. Providence had their best 3-point game of the year by far, wide margin. On the night they get Hopkins back in a home gym, it was just a night. I start with the fact that the very first play they ran was going to get them 2 points and get them off to a solid start, and somehow a layup right at the rim rims off. Then they missed their next 3 layups. Like I said, when you finish under 50% on layups, not a good sign. Not a normal thing. It was just a weird night in a lot of ways. Tough to replicate that kind of game. Providence did all the right thing. Every shot was going on such a low shot volume for them, too. They were 1.41 points per possession, like just a hugely high number. So BYU was inefficient. Providence was hyper efficient, and it happens.
It was interesting to watch Kevin Young on the sideline because he was obviously frustrated the officials, frustrating and all that stuff. And we hadn't seen that yet because he's so new and new to this collegiate game. Where do you think he and his staff, did they take more from this loss in how they're going to do it moving forward as opposed to the players themselves?
I don't know how to answer that one. I know that Kevin on that night, I mean, Hopkins got a really liberal, generous whistle. I mean, Hopkins' first night back, he was given a lot of protection, I thought, out there, and it was a rough whistle. I thought Hopkins got a great whistle, and it really frustrated, I think, Kevin Young and the staff. They've got 3 games in 4 weeks. And so they can really, I think the thing they wanted to fine-tune the most coming out of it was defensively. Again, I think some of the offensive things were just weird, bad bounces. You're not going to have those kind of nights. Defensively, though, needed to shore a few things up, and that's, I think, what they'll probably work on most. And it is a unique span of games or span of weeks where you play only 3 times in 4 weeks. It is the antithesis of an NBA grind that Kevin Young was used to with his guys. And so, I think fine-tuning, but especially on the defensive end.
Was Jagar Demon's knee okay? Because he came out with a sleeve in the second half.
I didn't notice that it affected him or not. But and he too is seeing how much attention and caliber of competition is going to impact his freedom out there and his ability to do what he wants to do. And a great learning experience for Jagar in a really high-pressure environment. I say that because basically every NBA team had somebody there. It was a big there were a lot of games in the Northeast. The UConn game the next night with Baylor. There were a lot of scouts that could cross off a lot of boxes in those 2 nights, and there were a lot there to see him, and it was not obviously his best night.
Now 0-10. I'm real curious to see how he bounces back because he's 18. And 0-10 in a hostile environment, he's been in plenty overseas, but this was his first
a different
Division
deal.
I.
No, I think what he dealt with overseas is not what he's dealing with now.
Fewer flares and quarters.
This is, it can't all, it seemed to happen pretty quickly for him. Yeah. And now we're kind of seeing it's going to be a bit of a longer process. Yeah.
Yep. Excited to watch Fresno State and BYU coming up next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, yes.
Yeah. We got a few days. Enjoy the championship weekend. We wish BYU was in it, but Greg, we appreciate the time, man.
You bet. Thanks
For coming on.